When you think of a grandmother, you most likely think of your own. Somebody sweet, loving, and wise beyond our years. Let's be honest, the majority of us, when we think of an elderly person, we think how sweet they are. Never in our wildest dreams do we look at an older woman and think, wait, she looks dangerous. Today's case is exactly the opposite of what most would expect. An elderly woman, a grandmother, and a woman who was proof looks can be deceiving. No one expected her to be one of America's worst serial killers. Let's go back all the way back to 1905 in Sweet Home, Alabama. On November 4th, Nancy Hazel was born in the tiny town of Blue Mountain. Now, back then, Blue Mountain was a mill town. It was a bustling and thriving hub of the textile community, which actually would have been one of the top employers back then. However, what we have to remember is it was still very rural, and the surrounding land would have been picturesque with farmlands and forests. Nancy grew up in a strict, abusive household. She had a father who was extremely controlling. She and her sisters weren't allowed to wear makeup, go to dances, or have any form of a social life. She dropped out of school after the 6th grade and was forced to work on the family farm. Sadly, at 7 years old, she suffered a traumatic head injury in a train accident, which will prove later to maybe be a key factor in what was to unfold. Like any teen at the time, she loved reading romance magazines and dreamed of escaping a harsh reality through a marriage or maybe even love. However, her real life would turn out to be so much darker. Nancy would go on to marry for the first time at age 16 to Charlie Braggs. They had 4 daughters, but the marriage was troubled, marked by infidelity and alcohol abuse. Sadly, the man Nancy married was much like her father. This marriage was no fairy tale. It was the start of a vicious nightmare, not just for Nancy, but also for her family. You see, Nancy had 4 daughters with Charlie, and one of them was named Gertrude. We don't have too much information on her records at this time because, well, records at this time were at best sketchy. Even her name is not a guarantee. But what we do know is she didn't live a long life, sadly. At around age 1 to 2 in 1927, she's suspected to have passed away from food poisoning. Then, within a matter of months, Nancy's other daughter, who, again, we don't have the name for, maybe Maria, we only know she was around 5 years old and also passed away the exact same way. Now, at this time, there was no way of doing autopsies really, and being so remote, a lot of the cause of death went missed. However, one person was suspicious, and that was her husband. All the meals in the house were prepared by Nancy, and after their second daughter's death, Charlie became deeply afraid for both himself and their surviving children. He reportedly suspected she had been poisoning their daughters. Responding in a way most parents would, he fled with their eldest daughter Malvina. But here's the strange part. Whilst he fled, he left behind their youngest with Nancy. This is really strange and most can't wrap their heads around it. However, some do claim that she was too sick to travel. But given the fact that his child is sick and he suspects his wife of unaliving their children, wouldn't you want to take that child with you and find help? I know I personally can't wrap my head around it. Charlie fled with his mother to a safer location and reportedly said he could not trust her and feared he might be next. Now, due to being left alone and a single mother, Nancy had to pick up work as a cotton mill worker. Charlie, although, did return Malvina to her care during the divorce in 1929, which I have to say blows my mind. Returning a child to a mother you believe murdered her middle children and was going to potentially do the same to you. Well, he defo won't be receiving any Father of the Year awards anytime soon. It wasn't long after this Nancy started a crazed obsession with romance. Yup, you heard me right, I'm talking a hyperfixation of sorts. She became obsessed with romance books, poems, and started answering Lonely Hearts personal ads in romance magazines, a habit that would shape her next relationships. And believe it or not, through one of those ads she met Robert Franklin Harrelson, a man from Jacksonville, Alabama. They married in 1929, marking her second marriage. No prizes for guessing what type of man she chose again. Ding, 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 ding. You guessed it, another abusive alcoholic. But believe it or not, that did not deter Nancy, and she stayed married to drunk old Rob for 16 years. Well, that was until she decided he had to go. And no, I don't mean to the shop for a pint of milk. Nope. After 16 years in 1945, Nancy did what Nancy did best. One day, when she was sitting down, polishing off a glass of moonshine, Nancy decided he had to be poisoned with rat poison. This would actually be her first confirmed murder. But alas, good old Nancy couldn't have killed Rob, people thought. Look at her, she's a grieving widow. This is also what her eldest daughter Malvina thought. Taking pity on her mother, she moved in with her and her husband. A move Malvina would soon regret. You see, this was because another infant would lose their life the second Nancy was around. Nancy had moved in under the pretext she was going to help Malvina, who was heavily pregnant, and it was when she was giving birth to her child in July 1945 the horrors would begin to unfold. According to Malvina's later claims, she had just given birth, possibly under anesthesia or heavy sedation, and in a half-conscious state she believed she saw her mother stick a hat pin into the baby's head. Of course, Nancy denied this, but the baby died shortly after. But doctors listed the cause of the death as unknown. Malvina later confronted her, but she denied harming the baby. However, suspicion lingered within the family. No autopsy was performed, so Nancy was never charged. You have to wonder what went through Malvina's mind. She had her suspicions, but she had to lay them to rest. But then something would happen again that would raise her suspicions in 1946. You see, one evening Nancy was cooking for Malvina's family in Oklahoma when her mother-in-law Lainey Holder took a turn for the worse after eating. It was quick, and sadly her mother-in-law passed away. Now, here's the crazy thing. Yet another person has died eating a meal Nancy has prepared, and no one saw this as suspicious. She was buried, mourned by her loved ones, and again, Nancy walked away free. At this point, I would have thought alarm bells would have been going off, but no one believed that Nancy could have been the culprit. And so, after taking out the mother-in-law of her eldest, Nancy thought, shoot, it's getting cold and I'm lonely again. Time to go hunting for another victim. Sorry, I meant husband. So in true Nancy style, she went to the Lonely Hearts again and perused the ads for love. That's when she found Arlie Lanning. Arlie and Nancy hit it off like fireworks, and within 3 days, yes, 3 days, guys, she and he were married, because, I'm sure they really knew each other by then. Not long after, Malvina must have been glad to see the back of her mother and the death which seemed to follow her whenever she was around. Her mother had settled with her new husband in Lexington, North Carolina, which was her hubby's new hometown. Now, remember when I said they knew each other well? Well, I'm guessing Nancy and her rose-coloured glasses slipped off really quickly, because you see, Arlie was pretty much the same as her usual type, abusive, cheating alcoholics. She sure knew how to pick them. He was always away from home and off with other women. Strangely, despite his infidelity, Nancy stayed loyal and publicly tolerant of his behaviours, at least outwardly, and neighbours described her as a dutiful, patient wife during their marriage. But behind the scenes, it was another story. You see, Nancy was plotting his death as revenge for all the years of cheating. After 5 years, in 1952, Arlie died at home after succumbing to a strange short illness. The doctor listed the cause of death as heart failure, common among alcoholics at the time. In reality, she had been dosing him with poison, arsenic in his food and water, which led to his rapid decline, and done it in such a way it had seemed normal. They really should have run an autopsy. Of course, good old Nancy at this point knew the way to play her role. Grieving widow, everyone bought it hook, line and sinker. Then she thought, you know what, I need a change of scenery. And with that, the house mysteriously caught fire and was destroyed completely. But all was not lost for Nancy. Weirdly timed fire had also made sure that Nancy got a payout from the home insurance, but then left her in a little bit of a predicament. where will she live? Well, she had that one covered. She moved in with her mother-in-law, Arlie's mother, saying she needed Nancy to care for her. And wouldn't you know it, not long after Arlie's mother also succumbed to a strange stomach illness and passed away. And like many others, it was after eating food prepped by Nancy herself. But oh no, this isn't suspicious, people. Wrap it up, no need for an autopsy again. Nancy can be free. And this time, not only did she have the insurance from her late husband's home, but now she had a payout from her mother-in-law's passing. With a nice tidy sum and still in need of a change of scenery, Nancy left town shortly after and went travelling to visit relatives. Well, not without placing some Lonely Hearts ads and getting back on the horse, so to speak. And oh boy, it was time for Whirlwind Romance number 4. This is when she met Richard Morton. He was unlike her other love interests. He was an alcoholic, which must have really did it for Nancy, as she married him shortly after on 3rd of June 1952. Richard was a retired businessman, which meant he was sort of a higher caliber than she used to settle down for. They chose to settle down in Emporia, Kansas. It was shortly after their marriage that her mother Lou had fallen and broken her hip, which meant Nancy needed to bring her to live with them. Her mother was extremely frail and in old age and needed a lot of help even with the daily tasks, and was utterly dependent on her daughter. However, it wasn't long before she would fall victim to Nancy. Within 1 to 3 weeks, Lou began experiencing severe stomach pains and violent bouts of sickness. It wasn't long before she deteriorated and passed away. And here's the maddening part again. No autopsy, and it was ruled that she died from natural causes. The truth was she was poisoned by Nancy, and you guessed it, with arsenic. Now, this time it wasn't for inheritance, there was none, but it did free her from the responsibilities of caregiving, and in Nancy's book, a win is a win. Later that summer, Nancy invited her sister Dove to stay with them. Now, you see, Dove had a slew of chronic health issues herself, and trusting her sister, she was more than happy to go stay with her. Sadly, she met the same end as her mother did. Within weeks of moving in, she was struck with a mysterious stomach illness. Now, here's the thing. No insurance or inheritance was to be gained from this murder of her sister, but again, it did free her from the responsibilities of caregiving. But if it was really the caregiving was the reason that she did it, she shouldn't have invited her mother or her sister to stay in the first place. Both were profoundly disabled and needed constant care. I think this is exactly what Nancy loved. The dependency, the power of someone who needed her. She held the power to end or continue their life in her hands. It thrilled her. It excited her. As usual, no one suspected a damn thing, and yeah, seems legit. No autopsy needed. On you go, Nancy. And on you go she did, to her next victim, her husband Richard. In late 1953, old Dickie boy had been philandering around with a new woman. This infuriated Nancy, and that's when she decided, you know what, he's got to go too. In December 1953, Richard fell ill with severe stomach pains similar to Lou and Dove. He died at home in Emporia, Kansas in late December 1953. And you guessed it, guys, guess what? No autopsy needed. Authorities just assumed it must have been attributed to heart failure or illness. I mean, come on. If I was the undertaker, wouldn't you at least be side-eyeing Nancy at all of this death in her home? Well, they should have. She had poisoned him with her good old favourite, trusty arsenic. This time, however, she did get a nice payout for her troubles, life insurance and inheritance as his wife. But what was Nancy, or Nanny as she was becoming known at the time, to do? She was single and ready to mingle, that's what, guys. She went back on her good old faithful Lonely Hearts, and that's where she met husband number 5. In June 1954, Nancy tied the knot to Samuel Doss. Sammy Boy was a widower who lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma. However, unlike her other men, he was surprisingly conservative, and despite him meeting her through Lonely Hearts, he hated her interest in anything romantic and basically discouraged it. Quickly, this wasn't the romance she had hoped for. Samuel hated her frivolous spending and went so far as to restrict her access to money. Suffice to say, this did not go down well with Nancy. She would have no one have such control over her. And not long after their marriage, I'm talking months later, Samuel was hospitalized for a sudden illness. And I'm sure you have no idea what this would be for. Yup, another mysterious stomach illness. Nancy had poisoned him, but she messed up. It wasn't enough. And soon he was released back home to her care. Of course, she wasn't making that mistake again and swiftly re-poisoned him with a much larger dose. The second time was a charm, and it worked, and it was fatal. Samuel died on October 12th, 1954, but this time luck wasn't on Nancy's side. His death led to an autopsy. Finally! During this autopsy, they found arsenic in his system, and with this, the police started to open an investigation into his death. Here's the thing. When Samuel was in hospital, his doctor, F.S. Nunley, was immediately suspicious. The doctor couldn't understand why when he was in the hospital the first time, he recovered and was getting better. All his vitals shows he was well on the way to recovery. And then when he went home, he took a turn and got 10 times worse. The doctor wasn't buying what Nancy was trying to sell him explanation-wise. When Samuel was sent in again, he was showing all the signs of poisoning: nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps. So when the death certificate came to Nunley for his signature, he refused to sign it until he had a full autopsy done on Samuel's body. The autopsy was swiftly performed by Tulsa County Medical Examiner, and with that the toxicology results were in. Staggering amounts of arsenic were found in his system. With this, authorities could finally confirm that this was not a normal death. This was murder. This was major, and Nancy knew the walls were closing in. She had never had an autopsy done on any of her victims. She knew it was only a matter of time before she would be implicated. Lead investigators acted swiftly. Detective Chief Ray Page and Detective Sheriff Howard Edge started to comb through the autopsy piece by piece. Together, the timeline of events started to show something horrific. But they knew the first step was to question Nancy. When they went to question her about what had happened to Samuel before he died, what had he eaten? What was her role in preparing the meal? Did he have any enemies? Nancy acted completely shocked and bewildered, and every part the grieving widow, but she messed up. She gave conflicting stories about Samuel's meals and his symptoms. This sent alarm bells off for detectives, and they knew she had a bigger role in his death than she was letting on. The more they questioned her, the more their suspicions grew. They questioned the string of deaths of all of her husbands. Why did they all die the same way? They also uncovered the fact that before marrying her, she had taken out multiple life insurance on Samuel. Then there was the behavior during questioning. Nancy was cheerful, almost elated, giggling, making jokes about her husband's passing. This really left investigators unsettled during this time. Investigators also made a shocking discovery about the trail of dead bodies left behind Nancy. Not only her husband's dying the same way, but the string of family members and infants who had also died around her. It wasn't long before her years of murder would come to light. In November 1954, authorities obtained court orders to exhume the bodies of Arlie Lanning and Richard Morton, and they also managed to exhume her mother and her sister. Toxicology for all the bodies came back positive for Nancy's good old faithful: arsenic. Investigators wasted no time in presenting the mounting evidence, but it was the most bizarre experience for investigators. She giggled like a teenager, flirting with officials as she began to recount how she poisoned each and every single one of her victims. She claimed she killed for love and not for money, though evidence showed she benefited substantially financially. Now, going by Nanny, she confessed in detail to poisoning at least 4 of her husbands, her mother, her sister, her mother-in-law, and a grandson, all whilst giggling almost uncontrollably. She claimed her motive was dissatisfaction with their treatment of her, drinking, cheating and controlling behaviour. But let me just say, her 2 middle children and her grandson They did none of that. And her mother and sister, again, none of that. It's just an excuse for her horrific actions. It was these confessions that had been dubbed by the media as the Giggling Granny. She was formally charged with Samuel's murder in Oklahoma in late 1954 for the death of her final husband, Samuel Doss. In a strange move, prosecutors decided to only focus on the murder to secure a conviction. Initially, her defense tried to mount she was not legally sane, but after examination, she was declared fit for trial despite her insidious behavior. This within itself was quite controversial, as in court she continued to giggle madly and behave flirtatiously throughout her trial. Seeing little chance of an acquittal, her attorneys changed strategy and took a plea deal. She pled guilty to his murder and was sentenced to life in prison, but luckily managed to evade the death penalty in exchange for a confession. The fact that she had confessed to all the other murders but only faced justice for one caused a lot of controversy. It felt as if the victims were yet still to get justice. This case became a media sensation at the time. It was unheard of for women in the 50s to be a serial killer. Then, with her romance obsession and her bizarre behaviour, it only intensified media interest into what led to several interviews. They also had a variety of nicknames for her, not just the Giggling Granny, but the Jolly Black Widow and the Lonely Hearts Killer. The crazy part is, instead of being scorned in prison, other inmates said she had good humour and she was very popular. Additionally, she didn't seem fazed by her lack of freedom now, and she still kept her fixation on all things romance, romance books, romance magazines, you name it. If she could get her hands on a lonely heart, she would have. And then there's the staff. Yup, she continued to be flirtatious with all the male guards and the prison staff. She then went on to have several interviews, and not once did she ever show an ounce of guilt for her crimes, often trying to downplay her crimes and say she killed for love, not money. Thankfully, she was never eligible for parole, and on June 2nd, 1965, at age 59, Nancy passed away in prison from leukemia. Unfortunately, the surviving children of Nanny Doss, particularly her daughter Malvina, were very private after the arrest, and very little was reported publicly about their reactions. Malvina had already suspected her mother once before, after the mysterious death of her own son, Robert Lee, in 1945. Later, she recounted, years before the arrest, that she had seen her mother with a hairpin near the baby's head just before he stopped breathing, but she never reported it. Some crime historians suggest that Malvina lived with the lingering guilt or regret for not acting earlier, though she never publicly stated this. Malvina likely felt fear or unease about her mother even before the murders were revealed. Nanny had a very controlling personality and had lived with Malvina during several deaths. Some interpretations of the relationship may suggest that Malvina may have felt trapped by loyalty, fear, and even denial, especially since several family members died while Nanny was living with them. Surviving grandchildren and distant relatives expressed shock and betrayal in interviews with local Oklahoma papers in 1954 and 1955. Extended family reportedly cut all ties with Nanny after the arrest. Some relatives said that they couldn't believe a sweet little grandma could do something so terrible, reflecting the deep disconnect between her grandmotherly appearance and her crimes. As for her younger daughter, she really was absent in everything. Florine cut off all contact with her mother before 1954, possibly due to Nanny's erratic behaviour or overbearing personality. There is one bizarre incident which is connection to her youngest, Florine. After the death of Nanny's husband, Frank Harrelson, in 1945, Nanny reportedly moved in with Florine briefly. During this time, Florine disappeared for several days after an argument with Nanny. When she returned, she found her mother had sold all her furniture and belongings while she was gone. Florine was reportedly furious and cut all ties and greatly reduced contact with Nanny after this betrayal. Weirdly, Florine vanished from public record after 1954. She likely changed her last name, which was common at the time when women were married. Some even speculate that Florine, like Malvina, seemed determined to erase association with Nanny Doss and protect her own children from the scandal. The case of the Giggling Granny remains one of the most disturbing in true crime history, not just because of the number of victims she claimed, but because of the bizarre nature of her personality. She wasn't a cold-blooded killer who lurked in the shadows. She was a mother, a grandmother, and a woman who laughed as she told the world about her horrific crimes. It just goes to show you never can judge a book by its cover, and some people really are wolves in sheep clothing. Thanks for watching today's episode, guys. It's cases like these that really make you question how well you can ever truly know the people around you. Even that sweet old lady down the street might not be so sweet. Remember to like, comment and subscribe to join me on more true crime deep dives. I replied to all my comments, so I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are on this case. And as always, stay safe out there, because sometimes the monsters are closer to you than you think. That's all from me. I'll see you guys in the next one.